You will clear a 10-foot path along the entire back of your property line by Friday, or the homeowners association will do it for you and bill you for the service, plus a $500 non-compliance fine. I looked at the woman standing on my freshly cut lawn, her arms crossed so tightly she looked like a human pretzel. Her name was Carol, and her voice had the grating quality of a rusty saw blade on hardwood. I just blinked. Behind my house, stretching back a good 300 yards, was a dense, beautiful patch of old-growth forest. It wasn't a park. It wasn't a manicured green space. It was my property. All of it. The very reason I'd bought this specific lot. This forest was the last thing my wife, Sarah, and I had picked out together before the cancer took her. It was supposed to be our sanctuary, a place where the world fell away, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the scent of pine. Now, it was just my sanctuary. And I intended to keep it that way. This woman, this self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, was telling me to carve it up like a Thanksgiving turkey. I took a slow breath, the kind you take when you're trying to calculate a complex boundary line with a distracted crew. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice deliberately calm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. That forest is part of my private property." Carol let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound completely devoid of humor, like a dog barking at a fence. "That's adorable. No, that woodland behind the houses on this street is designated common area. It says so in the bylaws. You're responsible for maintaining the portion that abuts your lot." I'd been a land surveyor for 35 years. I'd forgotten more about property law, deeds, and plat maps than this woman would ever know. I knew, with the certainty of a granite monument set in concrete, that she was wrong. I had surveyed this very plot myself before closing on it. I had read every line of the deed, every covenant, every easement. The forest was mine. "I can assure you, it's not common area," I said, keeping my tone level. It was a professional habit. You don't get emotional when someone is questioning a boundary. You present facts. "Are you calling me a liar?" Her eyes narrowed, and her face tightened, the skin pulling taut over her cheekbones. She looked like a hawk spotting a field mouse. "I'm stating a fact," I replied. "My property line extends to the old stone wall 300 yards back. I have the survey map, the deed, and the title insurance to prove it." "Documents can be wrong," she sniffed, waving a dismissive hand. "The HOA has managed that land as a community buffer zone for 20 years. Your documents don't change that." This was the moment. The first little tremor before the earthquake. I could have pulled out my files right then, shoved the legally binding plat map in her face, and ended it. But something in her unshakable, smug certainty gave me pause. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This was a declaration of war over a territory she believed, with every fiber of her being, was hers to command. Arguing with a person like that is like trying to survey in a fog. You can't see the reference points, and you're liable to walk off a cliff. So, I chose a different path. The path of quiet observation. The path of letting an opponent get so tangled in their own rope they don't even realize they've made the noose. "Well," I said, offering a thin, non-committal smile. "I'll look into it." Her face bloomed with triumph. She thought she'd won. "You do that. Friday, remember. 10 feet wide. We need a clear fire break and walking path." She turned on her heel, her sensible shoes leaving little indentations in my lawn, and marched back to her perfectly manicured property across the street, a little kingdom of oppressive neatness. I watched her go, a cold feeling settling in my gut. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. This was going to be a project. And as a surveyor, I knew that the most important part of any project is the preliminary research. I went inside, straight to the heavy-duty filing cabinet in my office. I pulled out the thick folder labeled with my address. Inside was a fortress of paper, the deed, the title report, the Alta survey I had meticulously performed myself. I unrolled the large survey map on my drafting table. The lines were crisp and black, the measurements precise to 1/100 of a foot. There it was, Lot 17, with my house a small rectangle in the front, and the vast, green-shaded polygon of the forest stretching out behind it. The boundary lines were as clear and undeniable as gravity. Then I pulled out the HOA covenants and bylaws she had mentioned. I had read them before, of course, but now I read them with a new focus, the way you'd read a legal description looking for a fatal flaw. I scanned for any mention of a community buffer zone or common area behind the lots on my street. Nothing. There was language about maintaining the appearance of one's own property, of course. But the definition of common area was specific. It listed the small park at the entrance, the pool area, the clubhouse, and the thin strips of grass along the main boulevards. My forest wasn't on the list. It wasn't even hinted at. So, she wasn't just mistaken. She was fabricating. A different kind of anger, cold and sharp, began to replace my initial annoyance. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a power play. She had seen me, the quiet widower who kept to himself, and decided I was an easy target. Someone to bully into compliance to reinforce her own petty authority. She had made a grave miscalculation. She was trying to claim my land. My sanctuary. Sarah's sanctuary. And she had no idea that the man she was challenging had spent his entire life defining, defending, and documenting the very ground beneath his feet. She thought this was a battle of wills. She was about to find out it was a battle of facts, and I had all of them on my side. The project had begun. The first official shot across the bow arrived 2 days later. It was a crisp white envelope in my mailbox, the HOA logo printed in an elegant, but somehow menacing, font. Inside was a formal letter, citing a non-existent bylaw and repeating the demand to clear a 10-foot path. The $500 fine was already included, payable within 30 days. It was beautifully typed, signed with a flourish by Carol, President. It was also a complete work of fiction. I didn't get angry. I got methodical. I took the letter, placed it in a clear plastic sleeve, and filed it in a new folder I'd labeled, HOA Dispute, Phase 1 of any project is gathering data. Carol was providing it in spades. Instead of responding to her, I took a walk. I went over to my neighbor's house. Dave was a retired police detective, a guy with a quiet demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. He was usually in his garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle. "Dave," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Got a minute?" He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "For you, Mike." "Always." "What's up?" "You look like you just found a monument pin that's been moved 5 feet." I had to laugh. "Worse. I've got an issue with our esteemed HOA president." Dave's face clouded over. He set his wrench down with a heavy clink. "Carol. What did she do now?" I explained the situation. The demand, the fictional bylaw, the fine. As I spoke, Dave just nodded, his expression grim. "That's her move," he said when I finished. "She finds something she wants, declares it's an HOA rule, and just bullies people until they give in. Most people don't have the time or energy to fight her on it. They just pay the fine or do what she says." "But this is my land," I said, the frustration finally leaking into my voice. "It's not a matter of mowing a strip of grass. She wants me to cut down trees. She tried to get the Millers to tear down their kids' treehouse last year," Dave recalled. "Said it violated the roofline height restrictions. A treehouse. In their own backyard. They fought her for months before they finally just gave up and took it down. Their daughter was heartbroken. This was worse than I thought. She wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was a tyrant who enjoyed wielding her power." "So what's her angle here?" I asked. "Why does she suddenly care so much about a walking path that's never existed?" Dave leaned back against his workbench. "I've heard whispers. She's been talking for months about getting a grant for community beautification, wants to build a fancy gazebo and a paved nature trail. My guess is she wants to do it on the cheap by annexing the back of everyone's property along the woods." It clicked into place. This wasn't just a random power trip. It was a premeditated land grab. And my 300-yard deep forest was the crown jewel of her plan. "She's trying to establish a prescriptive easement," I murmured, the legal term coming to mind. If she could prove the HOA had been using and maintaining that land openly for years, she might have a legal case down the road. Her bullying was a means to an end. "You lost me at prescriptive," Dave said with a grin. "But I get the gist. She's playing a long game." "Well, Her game is about to run into a property survey that's tighter than a drum, I said. I'm not tearing down my wife's treehouse, Dave. Not for anyone. Good, he said, his eyes hardening with a detective's resolve. So what's your plan? You want me to go have a word with her? No, I said, my own plan starting to form, like a map taking shape on a blank page. Not yet. I don't want to give her the satisfaction of a direct confrontation. I'm going to treat this like a boundary dispute. First step is to document everything. Second step is to clearly and officially mark my territory. You mean, like, put up a fence? Better, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I'm going to restake my property line. With witness posts. And official surveyor's caps. I'm going to make it so abundantly, legally, and physically clear where my property begins that even she won't be able to argue with it. Dave chuckled. You're going to survey her into submission. I love it. The next morning, I was out at dawn. I had my transit, my data collector, and a bundle of lath stakes tipped with fluorescent pink flagging. I found my 2 original rear property corners, iron rods I'd set myself during the initial survey. They were exactly where they were supposed to be, hidden under a bit of leaf litter. From there, it was simple, satisfying work. I was in my element. The world of arguments and opinions and lies fell away, replaced by the beautiful, clean certainty of angles and distances. I set a stake every 50 feet along the entire 900-foot rear boundary. Each stake was driven deep into the ground, a bright pink flag fluttering from its top. They formed a perfect, unwavering line, a visual representation of the truth. It was a wall of evidence, more powerful than any argument I could make. As I was packing up my equipment, I saw her. Carol. Standing on her porch across the street, a mug of coffee in her hand, watching me. Her face was a mask of cold fury. I hadn't just ignored her order, I had answered it with a language of professional certainty she couldn't comprehend. I gave her a polite, neighborly wave. She didn't wave back. She just turned and went inside, slamming the door behind her. The pink-flagged stakes were a line in the sand. I knew she was going to cross it. I was counting on it. The stakes enraged her. I could feel the heat of her fury from across the street. The next HOA newsletter, which appeared magically on everyone's doorstep a few days later, contained a thinly veiled attack. A reminder to all residents, the headline blared. Unauthorized improvements or demarcations on common area land are strictly prohibited. The HOA has a unified landscaping plan for all community spaces, and individual actions that contradict this plan will be met with significant fines. It was pathetic. She was trying to use her official-looking piece of paper to invalidate my legally binding survey. It was like trying to stop a bulldozer with a strongly worded letter. Then came the next phase of her assault. Small, petty acts of harassment. My garbage cans would be knocked over the night before pickup. I got a notice from the city for a junk vehicle parked in my driveway, my perfectly functional, registered pickup truck. Dave, my retired cop neighbor, told me it was a classic Carol move. She had friends in the city's code enforcement office and wasn't shy about using them. I documented it all. I took pictures of the garbage cans. I made a copy of the city notice and the email I sent proving my truck was registered and insured, which got the complaint dismissed. Every action she took was another document for my file, another brick in the wall of evidence I was building. The community was watching. I could feel their eyes on me when I checked my mail. They were a mix of curiosity and fear. They had all felt Carol's sting at one point or another. They saw me defying her, but they were too afraid to join me. I was a lone surveyor, checking his lines while the enemy circled. The turning point came on a Saturday morning. My daughter, Chloe, was visiting from college. We were sitting on the back deck, drinking coffee and looking out at the forest. It was a beautiful autumn day, the leaves a riot of red and gold. Sarah would have loved it. "It's so peaceful here, Dad," Chloe said, leaning her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you have this place." "Me too, sweetheart," I said, my heart aching with a familiar mix of love and loss. This place, this view, was my connection to her mother. It was sacred ground. Just then, we heard the sound. A low, rumbling engine. I stood up. At the edge of the woods, right next to one of my pink-flagged survey stakes, was a man with a commercial-grade wood chipper. A small crew with chainsaws was walking toward my property line. And standing there, directing them with imperious hand gestures, was Carol. My blood ran cold. This was it. The escalation I had been waiting for, yet dreaded. She wasn't just making threats anymore. She was actively attempting to destroy my property. In front of my daughter. "Stay here," I told Chloe, my voice dangerously quiet. I walked down the lawn, my steps measured and deliberate. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I projected a calm I did not feel. Inside, a furnace was roaring to life. She was attacking my wife's memory. She was threatening my family's peace. The surveyor was gone, replaced by the husband and the father. As I approached, Carol saw me. A smug, triumphant smile spread across her face. "Well, look who decided to join us. We're just getting started on that fire break. Since you refused to comply, the HOA has contracted the work. You'll be receiving the bill." The men with the chainsaws looked uncertain. They glanced from her to me, sensing the tension. They were just guys trying to do a job. I ignored her. I looked directly at the men who appeared to be the foreman. "This is private property," I said, my voice low and steady. "Every tree you cut is a crime. Destruction of property. Trespassing." The foreman looked at Carol. "Ma'am, is this true? He says this is his land." "He's a delusional old man," Carol snapped, her voice rising. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association. I am authorizing you to clear this common area path. You work for me." I pulled out my phone. "I am also recording this conversation," I said, making sure the camera was pointed at her. "Let me be perfectly clear. You have been officially notified that this is private property. If you or your men take one step past those pink flags with a piece of equipment, I will not only sue your company into bankruptcy, but I will also press criminal charges against every single one of you." "Your name, sir?" I asked the foreman. He blanched. He looked from my phone to Carol's furious face. He was caught in the middle, and he knew it. "We're not doing this," he said to Carol, shaking his head. "I'm not risking my business and my guys over some neighborhood spat. We're leaving." "You can't leave," Carol shrieked. "I have a contract." "Your contract is void if the work is illegal," the foreman said, already signaling for his men to pack up. "We're done here." They loaded up their equipment and were gone within 5 minutes. Carol stood there, her face a mottled red, her fists clenched at her sides. She was vibrating with rage. She had been publicly humiliated, her authority completely undermined. She turned her venom on me. "You think you're so clever," she hissed, her voice trembling. "This isn't over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will ruin you. I will make you wish you had never moved into my neighborhood." She stormed off, leaving me standing at the edge of the forest. The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I walked back to the deck where Chloe was waiting, her face pale. "Dad, that was intense," she said. I put my arm around her. "That was a declaration of war," I said. The time for passive documentation was over. The time for simply marking my boundaries was over. She had threatened my home, my legacy. She had tried to bring her destruction to my doorstep. Now, I was going to bring the fight to hers. I was no longer just defending my property line. I was going on the offensive. A good surveyor doesn't just look at one plot of land, they look at the entire subdivision. They understand how everything connects, where the boundaries are, and where the weaknesses lie. Carol had declared my home was in her neighborhood. I was about to prove that her entire fraudulent empire was built on my turf, the turf of law, evidence, and unflinching precision. The project was entering a new phase. It was time to start digging. That night, after Chloe had gone to bed, I retreated to my office. The space was usually a comfort, a place of quiet order. Tonight, it was a war room. I spread the HOA covenants and the subdivision plat map across my drafting table. My first step was to formalize my position. I drafted a cease and desist letter. It was a work of cold, legal art. I cited the state statutes for criminal trespassing and destruction of property. I attached a copy of my survey map and a notarized affidavit affirming its accuracy. I detailed the events of the day, including the name of the landscaping company she had hired and my recorded conversation with her. I stated, in no uncertain terms, that any further attempt by her or any agent of the HOA to enter my property would result in immediate legal action. I sent it via certified mail the next morning, requiring her signature upon receipt. It was a legal tripwire. But that was just defense. Now for the offense. Dave had said she was looking for a beautification grant. Grants mean paperwork. Paperwork means public records. I spent the next few days buried in the county and state websites. I searched for any grant applications filed by our HOA. I found one. It was a proposal for a $500,000 state environmental grant to build a community nature trail and educational gazebo. The application was a masterpiece of creative writing. It spoke of preserving the pristine local ecosystem and providing residents with a valuable recreational resource. Attached to the application was a map. My heart started beating faster. It was a crude, hand-drawn map of the proposed trail. And it ran directly through the back of my property, and the properties of my neighbors, exactly where she had demanded I clear a path. She had submitted a grant application to the state using a map of land she did not own, representing it as HOA common area. This was more than just bullying. This was fraud. Wire fraud, potentially, if it was submitted electronically. Mail fraud if she sent it through the post. I printed out the entire application package. It was a thick, damning document. Another piece of evidence for my growing file. But I needed more. Her fraud was one thing, but Dave had mentioned her financial dealings. An HOA is a nonprofit corporation. Its financial records, at least the annual summaries, should be available to its members. I had a right to see them. I drafted another formal letter, this time requesting a complete copy of the HOA's financial statements for the past 3 years, as was my right under the bylaws she claimed to cherish so much. I sent this one by certified mail as well. I knew she would stonewall. I knew she would refuse. Her refusal, in itself, would be another piece of evidence. While I waited for her inevitable response, or lack thereof, I decided to do some old-fashioned field work. I took a walk around the neighborhood, but this time, I was looking at it with a surveyor's eye. I wasn't looking at the manicured lawns, I was looking at the infrastructure. The retaining walls, the drainage culverts, the landscaping in the actual common areas. I noticed something odd about the work. Some of it was high quality, professionally done. But other projects, particularly the newer ones, looked shoddy. A new retaining wall near the pool was already showing signs of poor drainage, with water weeping through the blocks. The flower beds at the main entrance were filled with cheap mulch that was already washing away. It looked like corners were being cut. Or like someone was billing for premium work and providing the bare minimum. On my walk, I ran into another neighbor, an older gentleman named George, the HOA's treasurer. He was a quiet, nervous man who always seemed to be hunched over, as if expecting a blow. He was weeding his petunias with a frantic energy. "Morning, George," I said, keeping my tone casual. He jumped, startled. "Oh. Mike." "Hello," he wouldn't meet my eye. "I was just admiring the new landscaping at the entrance," I lied. "Do you know who the HOA uses for that work?" "They do." "Interesting stuff." George's hands stilled. He swallowed hard. That's a company called Prestige Landscaping. Carol has an exclusive contract with them." "Prestige Landscaping," I repeated, committing the name to memory. "Are they any good?" "The books look okay." A flicker of something, fear, panic, crossed George's face. "The books are fine. Everything is in order. Carol approves all the invoices herself. It's all very efficient." He suddenly found a non-existent weed and began yanking at it furiously. "I have to get this done. My apologies." He practically ran back into his house. His reaction was more telling than any financial statement. He was terrified. Terrified of me, and even more terrified of Carol. He was hiding something. That evening, I did a business search for Prestige Landscaping. It was a registered LLC. The principal owner was listed. The name made the last piece of the puzzle click into place with an audible snap. The owner was Daniel Fletcher. Carol's maiden name was Fletcher. A quick search of her social media confirmed it. Daniel was her brother. She wasn't just planning to commit fraud with the state grant. She was already committing it, right here in the neighborhood. She was funneling HOA money to her brother's company, approving the invoices herself, likely for shoddy work or work that was never even done. George, the treasurer, was too scared to stop her. My little boundary dispute had cracked open a hornet's nest of nepotism and embezzlement. The forest, my beautiful, quiet forest, was her target because it was the biggest, most expensive project yet. The grant would be a massive payday for her and her brother, all under the guise of community improvement. My refusal to yield wasn't just an insult to her authority, it was a direct threat to her criminal enterprise. This changed everything. The stakes were higher now than I could have imagined. Her viciousness, her willingness to bring in a crew to destroy my property, it all made sense. It was the desperate act of a cornered criminal. My file was no longer just a dispute file. It was a case file. And I knew, with the cold certainty of a surveyor setting a final monument, that I had everything I needed to bury her. The trap just needed to be set. The time for piecemeal data collection was over. It was time to build the case and set the trap. My strategy solidified into a three-pronged attack, a triangulation of proof that would leave her no room to escape. First, I needed to secure my property in a way that was both legally ironclad and visually intimidating. The stakes were a good start, but I needed something more permanent, more undeniable. I decided to install a camera system. Not just one camera on my back porch, but a network of them. I bought several high-definition, motion-activated trail cameras, the kind hunters use. They were camouflaged, wireless, and had night vision. I spent an afternoon placing them strategically along my property line, hidden in the foliage but with perfect, overlapping fields of view covering the entire 900-foot boundary. Any intrusion would be captured from multiple angles. This wasn't just for security, it was for evidence. If she sent anyone, or came herself, I would have it on video. The second prong was to consolidate the financial evidence. I had the grant application and the connection to her brother's company, but I needed an insider. I needed George. He was the weak link in her chain of command. He was scared, and scared men make mistakes, or they can be convinced to do the right thing. I waited a few days, letting the tension build. As I expected, I received a formal letter back from Carol regarding my request for the financial records. It was a masterpiece of condescending legalese, likely written by a lawyer. It stated that my request was overly broad and burdensome, and that the HOA would provide the legally required annual summary at the next scheduled meeting, which was 3 months away. It was the stonewall I had anticipated. And it was the perfect excuse to approach George again. I caught him taking his recycling to the curb early one morning. I made sure no one else was around. "George," I said, my voice calm and low. "We need to talk." He flinched, looking around nervously. "I can't, Mike. I told you, everything is fine." "No, it's not," I said, stepping closer so I could speak quietly. "I know about Prestige Landscaping, George. I know it's her brother's company. I also know she submitted a fraudulent grant application to the state using my land on the map." All the color drained from his face. He looked like he was going to be sick. I don't know anything about that." "Listen to me," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "When this all comes out, and it will all come out, they are going to look at the treasurer. They are going to look at the men who signed the checks and certified the financial reports. They're not going to care that you were scared. They're going to see you as an accomplice. An accessory to felony fraud and embezzlement." His hands began to tremble. "She made me. I just sign what she tells me to sign." "I believe you," I said. "And a district attorney might believe you too, but only if you cooperate. Only if you come forward now. You have a choice, George. You can go down with her, or you can be the men who help save this community from a thief. I'm giving you that chance." I let the words hang in the air. I could see the war raging behind his eyes, years of fear versus the sudden, terrifying prospect of prison. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice cracking. I want copies, I said. Copies of every invoice from Prestige Landscaping. Copies of the checks you signed. Copies of the bank statements. Everything. You get them for me, and I will make sure the authorities know you were a cooperating witness, not a co-conspirator. I gave him a disposable email address I had created for this purpose. You have 24 hours to decide, George. I walked away, leaving him standing by his recycling bin, a broken man at a crossroads. I didn't know if he would do it. But I had planted the seed of self-preservation. Now I just had to wait and see if it would grow. The third prong of my plan was the most direct. It was the public spectacle. The HOA meeting was months away, but the bylaws contained a provision for calling a special meeting if a petition was signed by 10% of the homeowners. It was time to see if the silent, fearful majority had a backbone. I spent the weekend drafting a petition. I kept it simple and focused. It didn't mention fraud or embezzlement. It simply stated that the undersigned homeowners were concerned about the HOA president's unauthorized actions regarding private property and lack of transparency in financial matters, and formally requested a special meeting to address these issues. Then, I started knocking on doors. I started with Dave, who signed immediately. Then I went to the Millers, the family whose treehouse Carol had forced them to tear down. At first, they were hesitant, afraid of retribution. "She'll make our lives miserable," Mr. Miller said, looking over his shoulder as if Carol might materialize out of the shrubbery. "She's already making all of our lives miserable," I countered gently. "The only reason she has power is because we give it to her by staying silent. Look at what she tried to do to my property. What's next? Your fence. Your garden. Where does it stop?" I saw a flicker of resolve in his wife's eyes. She took the pen and signed the petition. Her husband followed suit. It was a slow, painstaking process. Some people slammed the door in my face. Others listened politely and then refused, their eyes full of fear. But for every 3 who said no, 1 said yes. They signed with a grim look on their face, a quiet act of rebellion. Each signature was a small victory, a crack in Carol's dam of intimidation. By Sunday evening, I had 15 signatures. We needed 12. I scanned the petition, and the next day I delivered it to the HOA secretary, a woman who had no love for Carol, via certified mail. The trap was now fully set. The cameras were watching. The financial evidence was hopefully on its way. And a public showdown was now inevitable. Late that night, I got an email. It was from the disposable address. There were no words in the body. Just a single, large, password-protected zip file attached. A few seconds later, a second email arrived with the password, "I'm sorry. George had come through." I downloaded the file and entered the password. It opened to reveal a treasure trove of corruption. Scanned copies of dozens of invoices from Prestige Landscaping, many for vague services like common area maintenance, with costs inflated to 5 or 10 times the going rate. There were invoices for projects that I knew for a fact had never happened. $10,000 for drainage remediation behind Elm Street. There was no drainage system behind Elm Street. There were copies of the cashed checks, all signed by George and countersigned by Carol. And there were the bank statements, showing the steady, systematic bleeding of the HOA's reserve funds, which were supposed to be for major repairs like repaving the roads or replacing the pool pump. The total was staggering. Over the last 3 years, she had embezzled over $200,000. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the neat stacks of paper on my desk. The survey map. The fraudulent grant application. And now, the proof of embezzlement. The triangulation was complete. I had her position fixed from 3 different, undeniable points of evidence. There was no margin of error. The notice for the special meeting arrived a week later. It was set for the following Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. The trap was ready. The bait was set. And the target was walking right into it, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to give way. She thought she was coming to quash a minor rebellion. She had no idea she was walking to her own execution. The day of the meeting, a tense energy buzzed through the neighborhood. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. People who usually avoided eye contact were nodding at me, a silent acknowledgement of the impending showdown. I spent the afternoon preparing. I wasn't just bringing a folder of documents, I was preparing a presentation. I was a surveyor, and surveyors make maps. We take complex data and make it clear, simple, and undeniable. I loaded everything onto a laptop, the survey plat, the grant application with my property highlighted, the key invoices from her brother, and a summary spreadsheet I had created that showed the flow of money from the HOA account to Prestige Landscaping. I had a small, powerful projector ready to go. I wasn't going to let this descend into a shouting match. I was going to present facts, one after another, like setting boundary monuments in a straight line. Dave called me an hour before the meeting. "You ready for this, Mike?" "As I'll ever be," I said. "This is just field work, Dave. Just presenting the findings of my survey." "Well, be careful," he warned. "A cornered animal is a dangerous one. She's not going to go down quietly." "I'm not expecting her to," I said. "But quiet isn't the point. Public is the point." I walked into the clubhouse at 7 o'clock. It was packed. More people than I had ever seen at an HOA meeting. They were crammed into the cheap folding chairs, lining the walls. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else, anticipation. Hope. Carol was at the front, flanked by the terrified-looking George and the secretary. She was wearing a power suit, her face set in a mask of stern authority. She radiated contempt for the entire proceeding. She saw this not as a legitimate grievance, but as an insurrection by ingrates. She banged a gavel on the table. "This special meeting will come to order," she announced, her voice dripping with disdain. "As this meeting was called under dubious pretenses, we will keep it brief. The floor is open for the petitioners to voice their concerns." She said the word concerns as if it were a piece of garbage she was holding with tongs. I stood up and walked to the front of the room, carrying my laptop and projector. "My name is Mike," I began, my voice calm and carrying through the silent room. "I'm one of the residents who signed the petition. My concerns are not vague. They are specific, they are documented, and I'd like to present them to the community." I set up the projector and aimed it at the blank wall behind Carol. She watched me with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. She thought I was about to bore everyone with a rambling complaint. The first image flashed on the wall. It was my survey map, crisp and clear. "This," I said, pointing to the map, "is the legally filed plat for my property, Lot 17. As you can see, my property line extends 300 yards back from my house, to the old stone wall. This is a legal fact, recorded with the county." I then clicked to the next slide. It was a photo of the notice of violation she had sent me, demanding I clear a path. Despite this legal reality, our HOA president, Carol, has repeatedly insisted that my private property is common area. She has fined me, sent threatening letters, and on this date, I clicked to the next slide, a still frame from my trail cam. She hired a work crew and instructed them to trespass and destroy trees on my land. The video began to play, silent but damning. It showed Carol, clear as day, pointing and directing the crew toward my property line. The room was filled with quiet gasps. Carol shot to her feet. "This is an invasion of privacy. You have been illegally recording me. This is inadmissible." "It's not a courtroom, Carol," I said calmly, not taking my eyes off the screen. "And my cameras, on my property, are perfectly legal. But the question isn't about the video. The question is, why were you so desperate to clear a path on land you knew wasn't yours?" I clicked to the next slide. The fraudulent grant application map appeared on the wall. Perhaps this is why. This is a map submitted by Carol to the state as part of a $500,000 grant application. It shows a proposed nature trail running directly through my land, and the land of several of my neighbors here, all of it falsely represented as HOA common area. This, ladies and gentlemen, is fraud. The room erupted in murmurs. Carol's face had gone from red to a sickly white. "This is slander. These are baseless accusations." "Facts aren't slander, Carol," I said, my voice hardening. "And I'm just getting started." Next slide. The logo for Prestige Landscaping. Carol has been using a company called Prestige Landscaping for all major HOA projects. Next slide. A screenshot of the state business filing, showing the owner's name, Daniel Fletcher. It's owned by her brother. A collective gasp went through the crowd. People were turning to look at each other, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. And what kind of work has Prestige Landscaping been doing? I continued, my voice like a hammer driving a nail. I began clicking through the slides, showing invoice after invoice, projected 10 feet high on the wall. $10,000 for drainage remediation that never happened. $15,000 for common area tree pruning when not a single branch was touched. $20,000 for pool deck resurfacing that was just a coat of cheap paint. With each slide, Carol's composure cracked a little more. Lies. Forged documents, she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. Are they, George? I said, turning to the treasurer. Are these your signatures on the checks? All eyes in the room swiveled to the trembling man. He looked at Carol, then at the angry, expectant faces of his neighbors. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Yes, he whispered, his voice barely audible. They're real. She made me sign them. That was it. The dam broke. The room exploded in outrage. People were on their feet, shouting, pointing at Carol. She completely lost control. Her face contorted into a mask of pure rage. You are all pathetic. Ungrateful. I built this community. I made it what it is. This is my neighborhood. Mine. She lunged toward me, her hands clawed, as if to physically attack the projector, to stop the flow of evidence. But before she could reach me, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a suit, Dave's friend from the district attorney's office, stepped inside. The shouting died down instantly, replaced by a stunned silence. The man in the suit walked calmly to the front of the room. He never took his eyes off Carol. Carol, he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense authority. My name is Detective Miller with the DA's office. You are under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Carol froze. She looked at the detective, then at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and incandescent hatred. The public humiliation, the irrefutable proof, the finality of law enforcement standing before her, it all crashed down on her at once. She let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. It was the sound of a tyrant watching her kingdom crumble to dust. One of the officers stepped forward and put her hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was shockingly loud in the silent room. As they led her away, her head snapped toward me. Her face was a terrifying mess of tears and fury. You, she screamed, her voice raw. You did this. You'll pay for this. I will destroy you. It was the last, impotent threat of a fallen queen. No one was afraid of her anymore. They just stared, silent and wide-eyed, as the woman who had terrorized their neighborhood for years was led out of the clubhouse like a common criminal. The room was quiet for a long moment, the image of an invoice for a phantom retaining wall still glowing on the wall. Then, someone started to clap. Then another. And another. Soon, the entire room was filled with applause. It wasn't for me. It was for the truth. It was the sound of liberation. I packed up my projector, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done settling over me. The survey was complete. The boundaries were clear. The trespasser had been removed. In the weeks that followed, the story of Carol's downfall became a neighborhood legend. The full scale of her crimes came out during the investigation. She and her brother had a sophisticated scheme going, overbilling for materials, billing for phantom labor, and creating fake projects to drain the HOA's coffers. My little forest was supposed to be their grand finale, the $500,000 score that would let them walk away clean. She had underestimated the quiet men who just wanted to be left alone. She had tried to steal a surveyor's land. It was the dumbest move she could have made. With the help of the DA, the HOA filed a civil suit against both Carol and her brother. Her assets were frozen. The court placed a lien on her house, the very house from which she had ruled her petty kingdom. The community was going to get its money back. A new, interim HOA board was established, with Dave and Mrs. Miller from the treehouse incident at the helm. The first thing they did was go through the bylaws with a fine-toothed comb, stripping out all of Carol's ambiguous, overreaching rules. They implemented new transparency requirements for all financial dealings. The reign of terror was officially over. People started talking to each other again. There were block parties. Kids' toys were left out on lawns without fear of a citation. The miller's son started building a new treehouse, bigger and better than the last one. The neighborhood started to feel like a community, not a prison camp. Carol's fate was sealed in a courtroom 6 months later. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, the videos, the grant application, George's testimony, and the meticulous financial trail, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for felony embezzlement. Her brother got 3. Her house was sold at auction to pay the restitution she owed the HOA. She lost everything. Her power, her money, her freedom, her home. It was a complete and total ruin, a structure condemned and demolished down to the foundation. Poetic justice, I suppose. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my back deck, looking out at the untouched forest, I think about her. I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel a quiet sense of resolution. I never wanted a fight. I moved here for peace, to have a place where I could feel close to my wife's memory, a place where I could heal. Carol tried to take that from me. She saw my quietness as weakness, my desire for privacy as an opportunity to exploit. She learned, the hard way, that a surveyor's entire life is about defending lines. We deal in absolutes, in the undeniable truth of the ground beneath our feet. My profession, the thing that had given me a living for 35 years, became the weapon I used to defend my life. The forest is safe now. It's still my sanctuary. In the evenings, I walk the property line, the one I marked with those pink flags. The flags are gone now, but the line is still there, invisible but absolute. It's a reminder that sometimes, the most important boundaries are the ones you have to fight to protect. I didn't set out to be a hero. I just wanted to protect my home. But in standing up to a bully, in demanding that facts matter more than fiction, the whole community found its freedom. The peace I finally found here is deeper and more meaningful than the peace I was originally looking for. It's a peace that was earned. And as I watch the sun set through the trees that Sarah and I chose together, I know it's a peace that will last.